And first we need to start off with talking about an inequality. What is that? Well, an inequality is an unequal relationship that uses either greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, or not equal. And so you've dealt with inequalities a little bit before, but now we're going to start off with that and then take it one step further. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of investigate a little bit so we can get our bearings of what happens to -2 is less than 4 when you add or subtract 2 and -2. So I'm going to start off here with dividing this down the middle, and I want to take a look here at adding and subtracting 2 and adding and subtracting -2. And so when I take a look at this, if I take -2, I'll do this so I have my two sides, -2 is less than 4. If I add 2 to both sides, I get 0 is less than 6. It's still a true statement, so we're okay. Now, if I take -2 is less than 4, and I subtract 2, I'm going to get -4 is less than 2, which is still a true statement. So that's good. Now, if I go ahead and take -2 is less than 4, and I add -2, I get -4 is less than 2, which, as we can see from the other side, is also a true statement. And finally, if I take -2 is less than 4, and I subtract -2, which remember is the same thing as adding 2, I get 0 is less than 6, which is also a true statement. So what I'm seeing is that when I add and subtract positive and or negative numbers to an inequality, nothing changes. So maybe make a note here. Adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers in an inequality does not change its validity. And for those of you who are wondering what validity means, is how truthful or how correct it is. Now, on the other hand, let's go ahead and take a look at this second one. Now I want to take -2 is less than 4, and I'm going to multiply and divide by 2 and -2. So I'm going to multiply / divide by 2 and multiply / divide by -2. So if I take first -2 is less than 4, and I multiply by 2, I get -4 is less than 8, which is a true statement. Now if I take -2 less than 4, and I divide by 2, I get -1 is less than 2. Still, true statement. Let's go over to the other side. Now I've got the -2 is less than 4, and I'm going to multiply by -2. And I get 4 is less than -8. This is a false statement. Now, before we get into talking about this, let's take a look at -2 less than 4, and I'm going to divide by -2. And I get 1 is less than -2. This is also a false statement. So I'm going to guess that this negative here has something to do with that. Now, if I take this symbol here and I flip it, I now have 1 is greater than -2 and 4 is greater than -8, which makes it a true statement. So we can safely say that when multiplying or dividing by a negative, we need to flip the inequality symbol or inequality sign. And this is very important that it's only when multiplying or dividing, and only when you're multiplying or dividing by a negative, as you will see when we get into the next piece.